Okay, good evening and welcome. Thank you so much. So we have everyone with us this evening. So we're going to be beginning now. Welcome also to our online audience. It's a hybrid event. So I'll begin by introducing myself. My name is Ikpe. I'm Director of the African Leadership Center here at King's College London, and I'm also a reader in development economics. It is my distinct honor to welcome you all in the room and online to King's Africa Week 2024. I'm very proud to say this is the sixth one in the series. I can hardly believe it. This evening's keynote launches us into this week's Africa Week theme, Owning Agency, Africa's Future, and Evolving Part of the World. Over the week, we will collectively engage on this theme through a wide range of fascinating conversations, panels, exhibitions, performances, and film screenings, with participation from all the faculties at King's College London and our partner institutions in Africa, Europe, and the rest of the world. And encourage everyone who's here with us in the room and online to please have a look at the website www.kcl.ac.uk/Africa-Week for more information on all our Africa Week events. This evening's opening keynote is titled, Is African Agency for Sale, for Hire, or Self-Renewal? How can Africa shape the UN Summit of the future? It will address questions of whether African nations are susceptible to external influence that undermines their own agency, how Africa's collective agency is deployed for hire, and whether and how that agency can be pivoted for self-renewal, and essentially that sparks a critical examination of Africa's own role on the global stage. Let me add that this year's final keynote event, which is a high-level panel on the role of multilateral organizations in projecting Africa's agenda on the global stage, will close the circle on this conversation, and that is being held on Thursday here at King's College London from 5 to 7 p.m. That's also a hybrid event, so I really encourage you to also join us for that, alongside, of course, a range of Africa Week events this week. Now, the format for this evening's event will be as follows. We begin with lectures from our keynote speakers, Professor Funmi Olonisakin and His Excellency Ambassador Manoa Esipisu. We will then move to panel contributions. Each panel respondent will offer their first responses for 3 minutes only. Each subsequent response from the panel will be for a maximum of 2 minutes. Beyond that, some speakers have been invited to contribute to the debate from the floor, and they will be called upon at the appropriate time by either Ambassador Esipisu or Professor Olonisakin. Additional speakers will be invited from the audience to join the debate. And for that, a speakers list will be open for a set period. Professor Olonisakin will direct us as to when that will occur. Speakers from this list will then contribute to the debate by offering a new fact, supporting or opposing a position that have already been articulated with clear reasons, or by offering a new perspective on the key issues raised in the debate so far. Speakers from the floor will not address questions to any of the prior speakers. At this time, let me also invite our online audience to feel free to drop questions or comments into the Q&A or the chat box, and we'll have them there, and these will then be read out to our speakers. I am now absolutely delighted to welcome, to introduce, first of all, our first keynote speaker for this evening's event, Professor Funmi Olonisakin. No, I have to, honor your honesty. Allow me a few words, and can only afford a few words to introduce this really outstanding individual. Professor Olonisakin is Vice President, International Engagement and Service at King's College London. She's also Professor of Security Leadership and Development at the African Leadership Center in the School of Global Affairs at King's College London. As Director of the Center, it's a great boon in my to have her be part of our team. In her role as Vice President, Professor Olonisakin facilitates the deployment of key assets, including knowledge, scholarship, and talent in service of society. She does this locally, nationally, and internationally to enable transformative and lasting impact. Producing knowledge that influences change beyond the academy has been at the heart of Professor Olonisakin's research work and life as an academic. She has positioned her work to serve as a bridge between academia and the world of policy. Her research has been shaped by her interest in deepening understanding of why civil wars relapse and the drivers of youth violence and exclusion in the developing world. More recently, she has sought to explore the interface between leadership, peace, and security as a basis to unpack and understand the big transnational problems that confront the world today. Professor Olonisakin founded the African Leadership Center both at King and in Kenya as a collaboration between King and the University of Nairobi. And I dare say it is an outstanding example of what happens when you have long-standing, enduring, equitable partnerships between institutions on the African continent and in Europe. Previously, Professor Olonisakin worked in the United Nations Office of the Special Representative of the Secretary General in New York. In January 2015, the United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon appointed Professor Olonisakin as one of 7 members of the advisory group of experts on the review of UN peacebuilding architecture. And in 2016, as a member of the advisory group of experts for the United Nations Progress Study on Youth, Peace, and Security. In 2018, she was appointed to the Council of the United Nations University, in which she currently serves as chair. Professor Olonisakin was appointed as an extraordinary professor in 2016 by the University of Pretoria and received the degree of Doctor of Philosophy in May 2022 in recognition of her immense, significant contributions to the promotion of peace, security, justice, and international solidarity in Africa, with special reference to women and youth. Please join me in welcoming her to deliver her talk.
Thank you very much, Eka. That was very embarrassing. I thought I'd just come here and give the keynotes, but to have my colleague do me the honor of introducing me that way is a great pleasure. Good evening, everyone. But let me begin first and foremost to do a bit of protocol. I want to welcome you here, Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, our colleagues and friends online, our students at the African Leadership Center at King's College London, particularly in the School of Global Affairs, my own colleagues in that place too. Allow me to recognize, first and foremost, and pay tribute to His Excellency Ambassador Manoa Esipisu, who's my co-host this evening. Ambassador, thank you so much. You will hear his bio later. But I also want to welcome in our midst this evening a host of people. The ambassador of Zambia to the United Kingdom, Her Excellency Ambassador Mazoka, welcome. Ambassador Lina Scott, Excellency Ambassador of Namibia, you're welcome. We commiserate with you on the loss of your eminent, foremost leader. We realize that it took some time to do the needful. You're welcome back to the meeting. Dr. Excellency, I should say, Dr. Kari Defari, who needs to introduction amongst the African Leadership Center scholars because he's a visiting professor there and a long of King's College London. You're welcome. Likewise, Professor Yusuf Mahmoud, needs to introduction, is also a visiting professor here. My colleague, Shumai Nodi, who you see on the podium later, will be well introduced, the Executive Director of the African Leadership Center. Let me recognize other visiting professors and associates. Professor Alan Rinsdorf, former Vice Chancellor of the University of Johannesburg, who's a lifelong here at King's and visiting professor. But our living practitioners also need no introduction to our students. General Martin Luther Agwai and Dr. Fatima Mkilu, they're all in the audience, but our students know them and have interacted with them. Ms. Bisi Adele Efayemi, also in the audience there. But I want to welcome the most recent addition to our living practitioners, Dr. Pisa Besike. He's in the room here, and those of you know him as Uganda's, former foremost opposition leader. You're very welcome to King's College London. Now, let me also recognize in this room our special guest who will be giving a keynote on Thursday, and that is Madam Hannah Tete, the UN Special Envoy for the Horn of Africa. She's present in this room. You're welcome. Welcome to King's. Your first time. I believe in this audience we have our Board of Trustees member who is also visiting with us at King's, Ms. Zida Maya Famanelli. We have here Ms. Kumbature. I believe I have not yet seen her, one of our visiting practitioners as well. Let me recognize finally, the High Commissioner of Ghana, Excellency, for Kaka Owusu and Funmi is represented by the Deputy High Commissioner there. You're welcome. Oh, I'm sorry. You're welcome. Excellency, sorry about that. The Ambassador of South Africa, Excellency Ambassador Manoa is represented here, I believe, by the Deputy. You're welcome. We have also representatives from the embassies of Morocco. I think the Municipal Councillor is here. You're welcome. And from Algeria. I think the cultural attaché from Algeria is here. And I will continue to do this all through the evening because I know the typical form I would have left out 1 or 2 days. Now, let me begin. Oh, and I knew I did that. I'm beginning to see my list. And should I apologize? Excellency Ambassador Johnson Musingi, High Commissioner for the Republic of Rwanda. Good evening. Thank you. Excellency Mrs. Sarah Amani, the High Commissioner for Cote d'Ivoire. Good evening. Yes, I think I've now pretty much done the needful. But as they say in our countries, all protocols observed. Now let me set the tone. My opening keynote is meant to set the tone conceptually and intellectually for this evening's debate. And you've already heard from my colleague that this culture of debating is one we want to take seriously. We will not bring people to King's to just help us, sit on stage whilst people fire questions at them. We want people to think deeply about the challenges we're putting in front of you and to contribute to this debate. That is why those who will contribute to the debate will come on the podium. I want to join Ikpe in really welcoming you all to the African Week. In my opening keynote, I seek to provide some context for the debate, as I said earlier, by providing certain conceptual clarifications and outlining key issues related to African agency, setting the scene for what will be Ambassador Esipisu's keynote that follows. Let me now put on the table my arguments, because we're here this evening to challenge each other deeply. Because we're working, we come from, and we walk and speak and talk about a continent that is very precious to those who are from there or work there. And I think it's a no-brainer to really say that this is both a challenging moment and a moment of opportunity. I argue, therefore, that we need to begin to challenge the classical conception of agency. I argue it does not capture Africa's reality. What's more, what I describe as the fire, the sale of African agency undermines and stalls the renewal of Africa's agency and the renewal of the continent as a whole, I dare say. But at the same time, I want to submit that renewal of Africa's agency is possible. Even at this moment of turbulence in global affairs, there's an opportunity to reposition Africa in the global order that is in flux. So one of the first things I will do 4 things. And the first thing I'll do is to really look at the prevailing context in which the idea of agency is being explored. What does that context look like? It's a context in which there's momentous change. Some of the things we're seeing now are reminiscent of things we might have seen several decades ago. We hope not, that it will not be as extreme, but the rules-based international order is being challenged to the core. The institutions established to maintain international peace and security globally, if you like the United Nations, and regionally, especially the African Union and ECOWAS, they appear to be on the back foot. We have seen how failure to defend established norms when directly challenged or undermined by members and perceptions of double standards in particular in applying declared norms. We've seen how they are eroding global and regional governance. This is the crux of the matter. And we can think of so many examples of this among global institutions and African regional organizations. We now see how Africa's once coveted normative framework, including its continental peace and security architecture, seems to be at odds with today's reality. And what to do about that is partly what we're debating tonight. And it's not going to be the last word of this, but it's worth reflecting on. But at the same time, within this global disorder, lies an opportunity for internal renewal and global repositioning for Africa. Reclaiming Africa's agency, and I really use the word reclaiming, because that agency was not always absent in that. Reclaiming Africa's agency will require both introspection and proactivity on the part of African leaders across all spheres. It also means an interrogation of the structures shaping intra-African affairs and the terms of engagement of the emerging global disorder. This must, however, begin with acknowledging that African agency is caught in an uncertain and an undecided space, if you like the void. The uncertainty is really pronounced by the ambiguities about how Africa's voice is projected, how African-led ideas travel, how the continent's human and natural resources are leveraged, and the patterns and terms of Africa's engagement in the global arena. But it is also the case that Africa's engagement in the global arena is strongly mediated by established frameworks that connote particular forms of agency and norms of engagement. Challenging these established ideas and reversing the patterns is the issue that confronts any effort to consolidate or convene Africa's agency in its multidimensional forms for renewal of the continent. So, I said I'll do 4 things. I just set the context broadly. But I want to make 3 key arguments here, which will reinforce what I said at the start. The first is that the classical conception of agency in global affairs does not capture Africa's realities, as I said earlier. That classical view of agency in international relations places Africa in a bind, and it limits the influential expressions of agency and possibilities of renewal of Africa's agency. Of course, as students of IR here, those of security studies, understand this, that when we talk about agency in international relations, we talk about the state, essentially. We talk about agents of the state, and particular kinds of agents of the state are often spoken about. If we sit in the Security Council, we can look at the 3 members that represent Africa as though they will be projecting agency for Africa. I question this very strongly because of the structures that underpin this. Traditional ideas of agency, I suggest, are inherently problematic, making it difficult for African agency to be acknowledged in international relations. Some of our colleagues who are students today, Africans and non-Africans alike, have more or less debated some of it. And Bedrick and Hamilton will tell you that it is the case that African international relations, in African international relations, scholarship on Africa tends to concern itself with the way in which marginalized, poor, and weak African countries are acted and impacted upon by great powers and international institutions. And in a sense, sometimes this sense of victimhood tends to just dominate the debate. We've seen Brown's work, very elegant, work that talks about African international relations as dominated by the concern to explain how Africa has been governed, shaped, and marginalized by external actors, as though Africa itself does not have agents or actors that marginalize the people. And this is where I want to take us in terms of thinking about agencies differently. The challenge with the state and elite-centric view of agency is that where governing elite and people are not at one, right? It is difficult to transfer agency between them. It is not a two-way flow of influence. And I'm not suggesting by any account that there's a two-way flow of this of influence always in the United Kingdom and the United States. We've seen what happens in this space. But today's conversation is about Africa. The time has come to examine African agency through an expanded interdisciplinary lens. And we have done some work in this area. But I especially like Alex Ntomi's work, and here's what he said. It is essential to distinguish between agency for the continent in broad international affairs and agency for specific groups of Africans. In many cases, agency is expressed as resistance, what many of external observers dismiss as mindless spoiling, because enhancing agency for elites is in direct tension with agency for the marginalized and disenfranchised. This is the question that I think we need to reflect on carefully. Jonathan Fisher does an interesting thing too, because he reported this notion and goes as far as to situate this as the distinction between the meaning of agency and the meaning of what is African. And we need to reflect on that. And much of the discourse really, as I said earlier, is about state and elite agents. But I want to rapidly take us to a place where I think we can begin to say that African agency to be effective and impactful on the global stage must draw on the capabilities and qualities of citizens, groups, communities, and states alike. Because only collective agency will do. Africa's renewal depends on this. Of course, collective agency can have both positive and negative outcomes. For the people asserting influence, as well as the people who are feeling the impact of that assertion of influence. But it requires that all, as in everyone, everything is brought together to respond to the critical issues that affect the continent. It's not on all issues to accumulate agency and have collective agency, but on some issues that are so core to the continent, without that collective agency, we will be at sea. And I'm sorry to say that we're almost at sea at the moment, but I am someone that remains optimistic that that collective agency is possible. And we have seen glimpses of this in the past. We've seen it in recent past, I dare say. This produced the African Union's Constitutive Act, ECOWAS new treaty, African peer review mechanism. But I have to say, and others can disagree when it's your turn to contribute, that this has dimmed in the last decade at least, with various forms of appropriation, of hire and sale of African agency. And therefore, my second argument is this, it's my penultimate argument, that the hire and the sale of African agency has greatly undermined Africa on the global stage. But what do I mean by sale or hire of agency? And what are the manifestations of this? And what does renewal look like? Hiring of agency, I see in the simplest of terms, as speaking to the renting of Africans to boost the image and standing of others in the global stage. Dr. Funmi, a visiting professor, spoke to some of these issues when he gave his public lecture. I think it was in November sometimes. It is worth offering those several illustrative examples. One which is increasingly cited as an example of Africa's dependence is the use of summits to convene African governments by countries with great or middle power status. In 2024 alone, we have had actually already in January, Italy Africa Summit. In June, we will have Korea Africa Summit. We would also then have this year the 9th FOCAC, which is Forum of China-Africa Cooperation. And we will have UK Africa Investment Summit in April. And in the past year, we've had France, Africa, Russia, Africa, Brazil, Africa. In a nutshell, it seems the convening of Africa Summit is one of the easiest ways for aspiring middle power countries to confirm their status on the global stage. So if you like, you can just rent African agency when you want to really emerge on the global stage. In sum, this translates into renting the collective agency of African states to announce a nation's acquisition of middle or global power status. What does the sale of African agency represent? There are more economists in this room who are, the economists in this room, they're much better than I to be able to do the analysis of, state-to-state trade and investment. That's not what I'm trying to do. But I just want to say that this represents a conscious decision sometimes. For example, by agents, single agents, not the collective, to auction their resources, personal resources and collective resources for the realization of gains that are not in the overall or long-term interests of the collective. Included in this, actually, is the capturing of African intellectual thought to deliver an agenda, be it ideological, economic, military. Sometimes it becomes a form of intellectual mercenarism. And I'm talking now about academics. So I'm not here, I'm an equal opportunities offender tonight. I'm not just talking about member states, diplomats, non-diplomats. I'm talking about us academics as well, whose ideas shape the theories that we build. Even when they're not relevant to Africa, we can implement those theories to fit Africa. And actually, on many occasions, I see loads of essays, loads of articles that have many African authors on that subject, but that are rarely quoted, and they're rarely quoted. So that's the sort of thing I'm talking about. At the level of states, one meaning of sale and hire of agency is the capacity for African agency to be influenced by external actors such as major international powers, China and the US, ex-colonial actors such as the United Kingdom and France. Their major ties to African nations, primarily, I'm talking now about the kinds of things you see these days. In fact, Africa is caught in that gap between the East and the West because it has refused to exercise its own agency to emerge as a polar, in the international affairs. And that's the point that I'm going to make there. Dr. Fayemi also alluded to this during one of his lectures. So, what am I saying? Let me conclude that same issue with at the level of African individuals. Late Peter Da Costa of the African Leadership Center did his doctoral thesis in SWAT. He called it the rule of experts. Because Africans also work at the World Bank, they are in all of these institutions, but actually they spend time trying to help those institutions really impose on Africa particular agendas that will not be there. Not at all times, but the fact is, we've seen what happened with structural adjustment, with the structural adjustment program. Today, we're beginning to see the proximity of African scholars as well, African policy analysts, to the US and UK and France, but also proximity to China. We're seeing the One Belt, One Road initiative and the ideas that are emerging. But what Peter Da Costa is saying, and I will quote that before I go to my point about renewal, is that at the heart of the inquiry, his inquiry is the notion of Africanness as a socially constructed identity amongst experts. He says, my focus on Africans' transnational development regime is aimed at elucidating the ongoing process of identity construction, evident in the deployment of Pan-Africanist discourses, as well as in the emergence of expert-led continental initiatives and arrangements. My claim, he said, is not that African experts working transnationally are setting their African identity as a contrast to Western or global models of development. It goes on and on, but the point is, to leave it there is that of complexity. The multiple identities show, but without collective agency and consciousness about that collective agency, we will all serve different masters at different times. So what do I mean by renewal of African agency? It's about a collective, integrated thinking, approach, action that goes beyond the purview of the state or formal actors to include abundant manifestations of Africa's soft power, such as its creative economies, arts, theater, innovation, some of which exist in spite of the state, not because of the state. At the same time, we can see collective African agency in the form of resistance, such as youth protests, and that is Utom's point, that you see that thing we call resistance and spoiling represents a form of agency. Youth protests, mass youth migration across the Sahara, across the Mediterranean, and the Gulf of Aden. As indicated earlier, collective agency can have both positive and negative outcomes for those asserting influence, as well as those upon whom influence is being asserted, particularly when that assertion of influence is rejected. So imagine both loads of young Africans arriving in Lampedusa and later spreading into Europe on trains and later crossing the English Channel on small boats. But they are not ever well received, and we know that in many of these countries. But whether we like it or not, I submit, it is an expression of African agency and a resistance of exclusive agency by African elite and European allies as well that have borne limited fruit for the vast majority of ordinary Africans. The solution to this must be new thinking and new approaches. It's a wicked problem for which there are no easy answer, such as asking those countries, keep your people inside the country. There's a basis on which they answer. But for me, when it comes to renewal, regional and sub-regional institutions have the potential to accumulate Africa's collective agency by bringing together common aspirations of peoples and their leaders and a common agenda, for example, on peace, security, and development. As I said earlier, 2 decades ago, the African Union and ECOWAS in particular held the promise of collective agency, and they successfully accumulated their common aspirations through sound normative frameworks. We saw how, at the time, as we were young scholars at the time, talking about, I'd like to the idea that military coups will not be a thing of the day on the continent. And we had the new African Union's Constitutive Act, we had the African Peace and Security Architecture at ECOWAS, through ECOMOG interventions in Liberia and Sierra Leone. They set the basis for what became the responsibility to protect, and a new treaty in 1993. But we see how R2P itself has been appropriated in different ways. It's not for me to go there today. But today, what we see is the shell of these collective agencies, with ECOWAS and AU unable to stem the tide of military force, and the latter losing 3 of its members. And therefore, one question to consider as I begin to wind this down is whether we can have collective agency when captured or semi-captured states seek to lead multilateral institutions. What's more, can representatives of regional and sub-regional institutions who were not elected by the citizens act as an agent for the collective? And without addressing the non-reversal and stagnation that has plagued Africa's continental institutions, we cannot have Africa's self-renewal and a collective agency that serves its peoples, their collective aspirations, and their common goals in the international arena. And therefore, the idea of African agents acting autonomously for the benefit of their individual countries, constituting self-renewal is something I doubt. So if you think of Niger recently and its rejection of France, demonstrating a breakdown of France's influence over Nigerian sovereignty, and Nabila Randami's work is very good in this area, for those who are interested. That the current Niger crisis can thus relate to former colonial relationships based structure. But the point Nabila is making is that it is more probable, however, that countries even worse, with worse records of corruption, human rights abuses, and all-round mismanagement, will step in to fill the power vacuum. Because there's not one or 3 states just in an isolated way withdrawing from the collective. That's not what will accumulate Africa's agency. As terrible as things may have been, that's what I think of this. Some will argue at this moment that in Niger's history, this demonstrates a move towards self-renewal of its agency, maybe of its agency. But the question is, can the departure of 3 countries from ECOWAS really bring renewal from the continent? And I suggest no. So as I close, my third argument is that there are abundant opportunities in the current plan to reframe African agency towards self-renewal. And one such opportunity is the coming summit of the future and the Secretary General's new agenda for peace. And Professor Mahmoud is here, who has written a beautiful paper on this, which we are circulating to our students, but we can share it with anyone that is interested. For my own issue is that it is doubtful, even if highly desirable, that African governments will seize the moment for the reason that Africa must be able to demand certain things and emerge and seize this opportunity. Why do I think it is doubtful? 3 quick things. Can Africa, first, can a new form of peace intervention in Africa that replaces the hollow liberal peace agenda negotiated by Africa? I have not yet seen the sign. Second, in its own internal realm, Africa's multilateral institutions ideally should have elected representatives by the people of Africa. Now you can say I'm dreaming. We haven't yet gotten elections right now in the individual countries, and I'm saying when they go to the African Union or ECOWAS, they should be elected. Maybe that's a pipe dream, but it's worth debating in this new era of highly possible technological advancements. But the idea of handpicking people by governments, especially people they do not want to see their countries, to just go abroad and govern the whole of the continent is woeful at best. African youth, third, must have a collective voice in the future summit that ensures that the executive agencies are settled. We don't even agree on the utility of African youth. Many people see them as violent and never to do well in some countries. And until we have a way of just opening the international stage to the 70% of Africans that are under the age of 40 at this point in time, I'm not sure that we'll be ready. So in sum, I'm saying the scene is not yet set for collective agency, but it is never too late. Thank you very much. Thank you. I don't talk too soon. I'm supposed to do the next round. I think it's my job to introduce our keynote address. We agreed that I will try to set the conceptual tone, and he will do his thing. And also know Ambassador Esipisu, know his profile, versatile in every way. But I just want to give a few highlights because I don't want to assume that everyone knows you, Ambassador. But I want to just read a few highlights of your bio. As you all know, he is the High Commissioner Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary of the Republic of Kenya to the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and permanent representative to the International Maritime Organization. He is also Kenya's chief diplomat to the Commonwealth Intergovernmental Family of the Commonwealth Secretariat, Commonwealth Foundation, and Commonwealth of Learning. As Kenya's top diplomat in the UK, he leads a team dedicated to strengthening bilateral relations around the key pillars of security and defense, mutual prosperity, encompassing trade, investment, climate change, sustainable development, and a host of other things, including diaspora affairs. He's overseeing the significant upturn of Kenya's fortunate to become the go-to country in sub-Saharan Africa and a significant player in UK-based intergovernmental communities. Amongst the whole range of things that he's done, I think it's worth highlighting that Ambassador Esipisu is one of Kenya's best-known media public figures and has had a long, distinguished career, first as a journalist, journalism trained and mentor, before growing into an astute communications and public affairs personality and diplomat, and an international public servant. I dare say that there are many people from journalism and media background in this room today, several. He also served as special assistant to the president of the African Development Bank. I want to say that he's a frequent speaker on global issues and the author of Eyes of Democracy in Media and Elections. which chronicles the experiences of journalists and observers in covering elections. In 2022, Kenyan President, Excellency Dr. William Ruto, CGH, bestowed on Ambassador Esipisu the civilian honor of Elder of the Order of the Burning Spear, EBS, for his distinguished services to public affairs and diplomacy. Those of you from Kenya and have lived there for a short period on account of ALC knows what that means. It is the highest honor in the land. Ambassador, you're welcome.
Now I'm sufficiently embarrassed. Thank you for the introduction. And thank you for setting the tone for the discussion this evening. Good afternoon, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Let me start by thanking King's College and the African Leadership Center for hosting this important event and an important discussion of our times during an important week here at King's. It's a real pleasure to see so many distinguished guests, colleagues, heads of mission, leaders in government, in academia, in business, and of course, the student community. I'm delighted that you are able to join us. Our mandate as ambassadors and high commissioners from Africa is to begin to think of African agency outside of the usual narrow channels. In fact, I dare say that is the instruction we have. It seems to me that the best way to do that, after such an elaborate introduction of the subject, is to reflect on a number of clear examples in the recent past that will demonstrate the points I'm trying to make. Let me begin with Ambassador Martin Kimani, my compatriot and permanent representative of Kenya at the United Nations in New York. As many of you know, he is an alumnus of King's College, supervised right here for his doctorate by Sir Lawrence Friedman. Now, he caught the world's attention when he spoke against Russia's invasion of Ukraine. He persuasively argued that whatever our grievances in Africa, we have mostly chosen to live within colonial borders. We have had every reason to reject this. In many instances, the borders were absurd. They divided peoples with common languages, with long histories of common life, and with common interests. The Kenya-Tanzania border divided the Maasai, for instance. The Kenya-Uganda border divided the Luhya speakers. The Kenya-Ethiopia border divided several communities, and so did the Kenya-Somalia border. In fact, this border's division was so ridiculous sometimes that at one stage, the vice president of Kenya and the minister in the presidency in Uganda were brothers. So one Kenyan, because one Ugandan, because their land was on each side of the border. One fell into the other country. So Martin argued that this ridiculousness was not reason enough to reject borders themselves. We have learned via the bitterest experience before and after independence that the only lasting way to resolve disputes of this kind is by common consent. Well, where even common consent cannot be agreed, It is better to continue to trade and talk across borders, and better to wait until the time is right for a fresh attempt at unity. Have we always lived to these ideals? I'd say an emphatic no. We can look back on some of the serious failures we've had in this aspect, and perhaps the most obvious one was the partition of Sudan. We all know how that turned out. But it would be fair to say that we have lived up to the determination of the founding fathers of the African Union that borders once established could not, should not, and must not be changed by force. Ambassador Kimani's example, in my view, is an exceptional use of African agency for 3 reasons. One, because of course it's timely. Second, it had thought deeply about the history of Africa. And thirdly, when the time came, it was ready to go. Additionally, it was both obviously correct and it served the African interests. In my view, these are qualities that our agency in foreign forums should aspire to. First, that as Africans, when we speak, we ought to speak sparingly, yet decisively. Let us not scatter our energy or credibility talking big but delivering small. And we need to ensure that we speak and act when we have a decisive advantage to do so. Second, let our African agency depend not on foreign theorizing or on foreign experience. The safest base for our agency is our own history and our reflection on it. That's why Ambassador Kimani was able to intervene decisively. His speech at the ring of authenticity and truth, and he spoke what he knew, and he reflected upon it. Let me add that this was an important moment because it combined 2 essential aspects of good agency. That it was both right and the self-interested aspects also counted. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I want to discuss another example that meets the criteria I've set above. That is South Africa's intervention at the ICJ in the matter of Gaza. Again, it is rooted in African experience. We know from bitter experience that conflict can consume entire societies. That's what we saw in apartheid and during colonization, where the entire way of life of one group came to be controlled and oppressed by another. The intervention by South Africa was just, sympathizing with all those who have suffered through it and looking for a just end to this crisis. You can still say that South Africa's attempt to solve the problem by law is better than the alternative bandied around. And of course, it is in the interest of ourselves, the parties to the conflict, and humanity as a collective. Ladies and gentlemen, that does not mean that it will succeed. It means only that when Africa acts, it should take South Africa's intervention here as a model. Let our agency be rooted in our experience. Let it be just, and let it advance our interests as well. And it has to come at the right moment, at the moment when we can make the most difference. And now, ladies and gentlemen, let me consider a 3rd example. Every time we meet to talk about climate, we meet in hope and urgency. Urgency because the threat of climate change is real and accelerating. Hope because the answers to the crisis are within our grasp. It's no secret that we have contributed least yet are most vulnerable to the impact of climate change. From heat to drought, to erratic rainfall, to erosion, the harm across our ecosystems and economies is enormous. So I want first to celebrate the recent success of the Africa Climate Summit convened in Nairobi by President William Ruto. Leaders from across Africa gathered to think hard about one of our most pressing common problems. We are pleased that their reflections were given have given a clear plan for Africa. When we go out to protect our planet and to preserve Africa's riches, we will now work from a clear, agreed, common plan. In my view, that was another fine instance of African agency. Too often, we go out into the world disunited. We lack a clear, common position. We lack clear, common goals, and we lack coordination. So this common plan at the Africa Climate Summit does not solve all the problems at once, but it shows what can be done when agency is united. A common plan means that we can speak more forcefully than any single African country could on their own. A common plan means that we don't waste scarce time or money pursuing incompatible plans. And a common plan, especially in a matter as important as climate change, means that when it comes to settling terms, each of us gets the terms the strongest of us can negotiate. Now, joint positions depend on common, accurate knowledge. If we don't know what our brothers are planning or what their priorities are, it will be much harder than it should be to find common ground. Now, there are many ways to reduce or manage our differences for the good of our agency. And I want to mention one. Common training in policy would be one important one. We often find that one of the most serious barriers to successful joint action among Africans is not our differences in language, is not the differences in our regions or our religion or identity or whatever for that matter. The stumbling block to many Africans is our very different ideas of policy. One might think that greater national protection for goods and services is important, while another might think that we should deal with partners even when they insist on fair trade, then we might be comfortable with. But without sitting in the same room and using some medium to rationalize your thinking, then everyone is acting really much on their own, and the continent is not achieving the goals it should. A very important but long-term way of dealing with these and similar policy problems is alignment via education. We now have serious joint policy discussions in our regional groupings, and we now have various climate groups sharing information with national and subnational governments right across the continent. And we have a lot of education and research institutions bringing people together for these discussions. It is something that we think should continue to flourish. We need to tighten these links and to share information and common positions as much as we can, because only then will we be sure that we have eliminated most of the policy friction and that we are working with the best available resources for our policy. And what do we do with African partners? We share interests with many in the global south. Many want fairer trade, climate mitigation, a voice in the making of the rules that govern the relations between themselves. But they don't have the reach that they need. So we'd say, let us stand with them. Faith in multilateralism. So the idea that the world is best governed by discussion in institutions where every voice is heard. But make sure that that voice is not hijacked by mercenaries. Make sure it is an authentic African thinking about African problems, and make sure that Africans themselves agree on the issues that they want to bring on the table. Ladies and gentlemen, these suggestions are no guarantee of success, but if we let our agency be rooted in our experience, and if we let it be just, and if we choose the right moments to act and institutions in which to act, then we will have made the world a better place. We will have honored our heritage and the ancestors to whom we owe our freedom, and we would have made agency and one in which renewal can start to flourish. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, let me close by stating the obvious, that Africa needs stability, that we have no nuclear powers, and that we know in a world in which might rules, we start at a disadvantage. So we really have to think properly about how we want to move forward. Respect for sovereignty, for rules, and a commitment to law rather than force in the settlement of disputes. These, ladies and gentlemen, are principles that are both right and in our interest, and we must never use or cease, we must never cease to defend them. We must never cease to be in a position in which we start to protect the ideals that will help move the continent forward. I thank you very much for the listening.
Thanks, Elizabeth. I'm just doing some introduction to the student. So, I think the debate will be. And now I want to call on our respondents. But let me remind the audience of the format of this debate. We'll call our respondents to the stage now, and they will each respond for 3 minutes. They will have opportunities to respond for another 2 minutes. Each round, they will come back to us. And speakers on the floor, as Eka said earlier, will not ask questions to the speakers, but you will make a contribution by responding to the points that have been made, by offering us a new fact, by supporting or opposing a position that has been articulated, with clear reasons for doing so, or by offering a new perspective on many of the key issues so far. And so, let me say already that at some point we're going to open up the list of speakers. And we'll already invite a couple of professors to the stage. When we open up the list of speakers, you will come here and you will take the podium. Shortly, this podium will be brought to the floor so that people speak, will see a short statements, 2 minutes each, and we will do in that order. Because if you're contributing, we should do that quickly. Now, let me welcome to the stage Professor John Kylie Fayemi, who I would just do a brief outline of his bio. You will have seen that on the website. There's only one bio that you have not seen on the website. And for those of you who don't know, as I said earlier, he did his PhD here in War Studies at the Department of War Studies. He's a visiting professor at the African Leadership Center. He's a former executive governor 2 times of the state in Nigeria, and was also a minister for minerals. Let me leave it at that because I don't know what the minister for minerals and the extension was. But I will just say, please welcome Excellency, I should call you now Professor Dr. Fayemi. I want to invite another of our visiting professors and one of our leading practitioners of the Practice of Leadership Program, Senior Advisor at the International Peace Institute. For what you will know him for, this man was my mentor at the United Nations when he was directing our business. He really isn't part of political affairs. He still made time for me as a young African at the United Nations. He's former on the second program and has headed his operations in Namibia, a second African Republic and Chad. And prior to this assignment, he held over senior United Nations position, notably as UN Resident Coordinator in Ghana, Director in the UN Department of Political Affairs for Women and Native, and head of the Office of the Representative General of Political Affairs. He was also a member of the UN High-Level Panel on Peace Operations in 2015, and in 2019, he led an independent strategic review of UN peace operations in the Democratic Republic of the Congo in history, pursuant to UN Security Council Resolution 2463. He wrote that excellent article that I mentioned in Professor Yusuf Mahmoud. Please, inside where your students are from. Oh, those are the governments of students, yeah. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Her Excellency the High Commissioner for the Republic of Zambia. Ambassador, as they call me, Chichi, is that right? Yes, Mazoka. With over 30 years experience in the communication sector in the area of business development, executive leadership, strategic partnerships, and more. This is another example of the versatility of the people. Prior to her diplomatic appointment, she managed regional communications and stakeholder issues for the South African Broadcasting Corporation (SABC). After having launched and led the operations function and partnerships with operational experience. She started her media experience in Zambia. And you can see that she actually has this area of expertise to in addition to diplomacy. She holds a BA degree in broadcast journalism from Howard University in Washington, D.C., a master in media management from the New School in New York. Those of you are familiar with that. And an executive management development program for the University of Stellenbosch. Let me welcome you to the stage, but I'm now going to read from my phone, and you can already see Ambassador's thoughts that we did some Googling, which is how they say about Excellency Ambassador Linda Constance, the High Commissioner of Namibia to the United Kingdom and Malta. She was appointed High Commissioner of Namibia to the United Kingdom in December 2018. She is simultaneously Namibia's High Commissioner to Malta. As a young woman, she was involved in multi activities with the church, from which she went on to lead, which then led to her studying politics and anthropology at university and later teaching English. She joined the Namibian Ministry of Foreign Affairs in 1990, when she was posted to London and then to Cuba. In 1995, she was affiliated to Cotonou, I'm so sorry about that. Then the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, and who was on the tour to the World Conference Convention. And now, it's a pleasure to welcome you. We will make sure we have your bio on the file the next time. But that was from the internet. And I would therefore, last but not least, my colleague, the Executive Director of the African Leadership Center, who leads our company with this, and leads actually the one of the LC from Nairobi. You will remove this, and then I will have the mics in front of you. I will give you an ambassador. I don't know how you want to do this, whether you want to stand there or stay on stage, or we hang out here, however you prefer. But there's also a chair on the stage.
Yeah, just hang out here.
All right, we're hanging out here because right after this, he will call the diplomats to close. Thank you. Yeah, but there's a chair for you, Andrew.
No problem.
Okay. Fine. Can we start with you? In the order that I called, please make your interventions. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Would you like to be here this evening, join the Africa Week? My first, it's been on for 6 years, but I've been away from this part for over 30 years now. It's good to be back. Well, there's very little to disagree with in the keynote statements made by both Professor Olonisakin and High Commissioner Esipisu. So mine would just be more in the form of maybe questions as to how to really strengthen agency, Africa's agency, particularly at the time of global turbulence, because it would appear to me that a lot of the turbulence that we see around the world has been refracted back to us in Africa. And the challenge is whether we just sit down there as recipients of that turbulence, or we treat it as an autonomous space that will enable us to decide how we want to respond to it. For example, we took the statement by Ambassador Macenje, absolutely correct. And this was how the founding fathers of our states responded. Because at the time that decolonization happened, we were largely recipients, beneficiaries of the UDHR and the right for self-determination, which was promoted by a number of countries post Second World War. And it is that global order that is disintegrating as we speak, that post 1945 global order. So if we're going to respond to it, we can only respond to it as a collective. Yet, if we look at the post-Westphalian notion of sovereignty, it's one that deals primarily with nation states. And what nation states often promote is national interests, not collective interests. And competition often sabotages collaboration. And we've seen it on a range of fronts, even on our continent. That's one issue to deal with. The second for me is the challenges that we have had with liberal democracy on the continent. Because the time that would appear that we were able to come together in the period of independence, when our leaders pushed that huge Pan-African agenda, and also in the immediate aftermath of the democratization process, post-90s, early 2000s, we had African leaders come together, visionary leadership that produced the Constitutive Act that Professor Olonisakin talked about in the past, the African peer review mechanism, the norms that are now being challenged, all came through that concerted effort led by visionary leadership. Well, where is that visionary leadership now? If you take what happened at the last African Union Summit, as an example, the most critical issue confronting Africa were not even on the agenda. We had a summit on education, innovation, and whatever it was called. Yet, Ethiopia did not appear anywhere. Tigray conflict. Sudan was not on the agenda. Eastern DRC was not on the agenda of the African Union Summit. So, in essence, peace and security was absent. And even in discussing the reform that President Kagame led, the question was put, started by him, who speaks for Africa? Is it the chairperson of the African Union Commission or the chairperson of the African Union? Because very often, the chairperson of the African Union, who represents the heads of states and governments, take decisions that then get redefined, edited by the chairperson of the commission. And yet we now have a seat at the G20. Who really speaks for Africa? And when we even decide that, what agency do we really have to speak as equal partners? 2023 budget of the African Union, $665 million. Half of it came from the European Union. So how do you sit as an equal partner with that institution that funded you when you're discussing trade, you're discussing migration, you're discussing fundamentally that Africa is supposed to have a united voice even when we speak of the commendable step taken by South Africa, which most ordinary Africans applaud, it would have even been better if all African countries were to line up behind South Africa. It would have been better if South Africa also reached out to other African countries on that very important issue. But that doesn't appear to be what happened. Nevertheless, it's still something that I believe ordinary Africans would necessarily want to applaud. Or even if you take the campaign at the United Nations led by Nigeria to establish a UN tax authority to address the question of illicit financial flows, in which Africa loses about $100 billion every year. Where is the agency to make that an issue in the front burner at the UN Summit of the Future? So at the end of the day, when we're talking about agency, I agree with Professor Olonisakin that we need to address what's happening in individual African states in terms of our democratic credentials. And when you look at the challenges that the norms are facing, it's a normative challenge. But this normative challenge is not going to go away easy because it's a conflict between the norms, a normative approach, and the utilitarian approach. People are still going to ask, what does it bring to the table? What benefits am I deriving from it? What is democracy bringing to us? It's a challenge, even if everybody agrees that a government elected by the people is the best way for Africa to proceed. This liberal democracy has to deliver the goods for Africans in order not to lose that opportunity of having the right agency that speaks for the people and also speaks for the state. So I would argue, Prof. and Your Excellency, that the challenge before us as Africans is to also look at the opportunities that are there. And you hinted at some of the opportunities. By 2050, almost half of the world's working population is going to come from Africa. The median age in Africa is 19. The median age in China and the United States is 38. It is 28 in India. So on all fronts, if we focus our resources and our energy on education, healthcare, and infrastructure without reducing ourselves to recipients of whatever comes from East or West, and we return to that age-old principle by Kwame Nkrumah, that we neither face the East nor the West, but we face forward, we would have strategically responded to the challenge of agency. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you hear me well? Yes. Okay. So I don't have to do anything. And so, over to you.
Thank you. I'm known to be a competitive practitioner. I'm going to be a practitioner giving some examples based on what we have heard so far. As Funmi said, in order for Africa to exercise its agency, it should engage both into introspection and proactivity. Let me add two qualifiers. I would say genuine introspection and smart proactivity. Let me just give you an example of genuine introspection, building on what Dr. Funmi just shared with us. In the last summit of the African Union that took place last February, there was indeed some introspection and some condemnation of illegal grab of power, and some condemnation of the use of coups to move, recognizing that ineffective governance is the bane of the continent's peace and security challenges. However, there was no reflection in the summit of legal measures to exclude political opponents from democratic processes, and how they twist terms limitation to perpetuate those who are in power. And I'm sure the examples are multiple. So introspection is key, but should not be selective. Proactivity. We need indeed to be proactive. We live at a time when the dominant structures, normatively and operationally, are under stress. And there is a reluctant acknowledgement that these dominant structures are vulnerable. Something is coming to an end, and something has yet to be born. And it is in that interregnum that we need to exhibit agency, but to exhibit in a smart way. And to give you an example. As you know, there is this body called the Security Council, which I call the Insecurity Council, for all kinds of reasons. It's a myth. It's not an institution for collective security. It's an institution for selective security, you know what I'm talking about. The Security Council generously, finally, said we are going to finance Africa's peace support operations, which is a euphemism for the use of violence to secure security, hallucinating the contradiction. In the UN, we call it peace enforcement. Can you imagine peace linked to enforcement? It's a contradiction. The African group, the A3, worked very hard to get it. But there are two things, two facts in that generous, concession. One, that these financing from assessment usually would be on case-by-case basis. Second, it's only financed up to 75%. Now, who's going to decide on those little details? Where is the money for 25% can it come from? So in other words, the Security Council of the United Nations, having failed to use peacekeeping or sustaining peace, finally acknowledged maybe when it comes to the use of violence, it's better to second it to the African nations, because they have higher tolerance for dying as a result of using violence. When in fact, peace, and this is speaking to the moment, we have been trained to link the fortunes of peace to the presence or absence of conflict. And so we have adopted that normative framework. And we forgot from our history, our context, that peace is a constant, perpetual quest. Peace never arrives. It's always arriving. And when you take it for granted, you lose it. And then you have all kinds of pressures to recover. So proactivity, yes, very important. These are liminal times of thresholds. Something is coming to an end, and something is waiting to be emerged, and this is the time to exercise agency. Very important. But we need to be careful not to be directed to actions or opportunities or initiatives that unwittingly extend the expiry date of something that is about to come to an end. So exercising agency is very critical in these times. One last example, speaking of Ambassador Kimani. In that statement, Ambassador Kimani said, when Russia invaded February 2 years ago, he said multilateralism tonight is on its deathbed. And simply because we have believed multilateralism as a state-centric form of cooperation, and we have neglected we the peoples. And so there is an important opportunity that will be taking place in your country, in Nairobi precisely, of the civil society conference. The word civil society, I don't know if you've heard about the Summit of the Future and all of that. The word of civil society in the 20-page zero draft appears only once. For a simple reason, because many African countries believe that NGOs and civil society are used as a Trojan horse to perpetuate a particular worldview. And so it is important that the Africa Conference for Civil Society that takes place in Nairobi this coming May produces a truly people's path for the future, And so it behooves all of us to make sure that we make room for that conference to be another example of Africa and peoples of Africa exercising agency. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to read for my next question. So I can make sure that I can fire. So, but thank you, King's College, for inviting me to speak at this very extremely long engagement on the planet. Is Africa Agency for Sale, Hire, and Sold for Marriage? How can Africa shape the U.S. And to agree with my previous colleagues, so there is not much to disagree with, but maybe some nuances here and there. The debate around this theme really remains important to us as Africa, considering the continent from the past, which has left some residual sentiment of the continent as a passive actor that can fall and a minor player which kind of connotes a sense of lethargy. However, if we look at the idea of African agency as the idea of African individuals, communities, and nations acting autonomously, making choices and influencing outcomes in their own lives and environments, I'm not so convinced that agency can be bought, hired, or controlled. Maybe influenced by external actors, because it is an inherent aspect of our rich history, culture, and diversity, rooted in our resilience and inspiration with our people. It's in our DNA, maybe one of the questions that could be asked is Africa being ensnared. Africa being ensnared. We have definitely, as no doubt about it, experienced and independence, making most of our countries vulnerable and dependent on assistance from political developed countries. And in spite of our many challenges, our economies, many of them do remain resilient. With average growth projections outlook for this 2023-24 at 4.1%, This alone should encourage us as a collective. The new multilateral order follows, allows for a shift of focus onto international regional groups and organizations that has been said before. Africa's rise can be seen as intertwined with the rise of the African Union, the impact, and many other essential regional bodies, which offer us a platform to participate internationally as a collective, coordinate our development programs, and ensure solidarity amongst our nations. But we must be adequately recognized, and it's a tone for us. The United Multilateralism enables us to pursue higher goals and take a radical seat at the table and contribute to these negotiations that happen. A good example of the resolution that we made at the recent health summit at the AU, and the formation of the Africa Fund, an alliance of African multilateral financial institutions aimed at establishing a comprehensive African Union of financial architecture reforms. So the Africa Club seeks to propel the African economic agenda on the global stage, addressing the shortcomings in financial and in the current financial system. So there are opportunities for us to collectively come together to change the narrative and have it work for us. If what's on the other side, quite take us through. For the agency lives. African not for hire. Our agency cannot and should not be hired or rented out. More partnerships and important collaborations with international actors can contribute to our development and progress. They must be based on mutual respect, equality and sharing of objectives rather than exploitation and coercion. A renewed conversation and different terms of engagement are required. We have to be the ones to set the tone. Our self-renewal. A renewed sense of African agency requires a renewal of the mind of African nations and communities to reinvent ourselves, overcoming historical challenges, and it's easier said than done, and it sees opportunities for growth and transformation. We have the human capital to do just that. And our human capital is young, vibrant, and hungry for knowledge, technology, and new ways to live as global citizens. At home, on a good thing. No one wants to leave the continent they didn't have. Granted, external factors can and must play a critical supportive role in Africa's development journey. We must recognize and respect our agency as central to the process of building a better future for the continent and her people. And again, we must set the terms. There must be a new world order in this finance. The financial orthodoxies inappropriately developed and applied in other countries, as we all know, in this regard, the BRICS countries established a new development bank as an alternative for developing countries. Our own solutions to our own problems. Africa has been insisting on the reforms of the United Nations system, pushing for UN focus towards development issues as well as demanding the greater representation of African countries on the UNC. Support in that area from friends are welcome. A new partnership framework with former colonial powers and others is required, not paternalism or neo-colonialism, not dependency, but collaborative efforts led by the African agenda. And in terms of shaping the UN Summit for the future, there is an opportunity for us. Peace and security, we know that's critical to the continent. When there's insecurity in one of our countries, it impacts us all. If we keep that mindset at the fore and in front, we can make some progress. Climate change, we've seen some of our countries do not take a leadership position. Leadership with regional, with local solutions. So discussions around how to move forward with climate issues on the continent should come from us. Global norms, again, speaking with one voice. Agenda 2063. If the AU is not working, we must fix it. We must fix it. World Trade Organization, Agency of Multilaterals, the African Free Continental Trade Agreement. A great opportunity for all of us collectively if we work together, and it's the only way for us to make it. UN participation that has been very supported. And I think we definitely need to strengthen in that area. And a good example of how once we work together as a collective, things do move forward. South African election as a non-permanent member of the Security Council of the United Nations. Again, collective agency. But we have to come together. And perhaps lastly, we must contribute to the new developments of this transformation of the world. Because we are in the I think there's a new phase of development that's happening in the world. And if you think about it from a technological standpoint, all of the critical minerals that are required for that to the keys to the future of the world are under our mission scope. If we do not collectively engage on how we utilize this opportunity in history, the new scramble for Africa is not going to.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Let's start. First of all, Professor, thank you very much for your condolences. It's been a very sad time for us, and we appreciate the support that we've received from across the world. And I think the death of former President Funmi in Tanzania just highlighted where we've come from. Our president often said that he identifies himself and his ilk as the third wave of African leaders, because we have the first wave that, spoke before independence and fought for independence of Africa and African countries. Then you had the second wave of leaders who set up Africa, and now you have the third wave of African leaders who really have to build a different kind of Africa in these times. And I think everybody who's spoken here this evening have added valid points to this debate, which is so large. So I think I'll just focus on a few aspects of what the Namibia and Germany are the two chairs of the Summit of the Future, which is taking place just before the General Assembly in September in New York. And I have before me the African points, the main agenda points of Africa. And of course, we have a 200-page document right now for UN, which the chairs have determined to bring that back down to 20 pages. They said it, so good luck to them. Speaking as someone who is chair of the Board of Governors of the Commonwealth, I can tell you that to reduce language in a multilateral setting is not that easy. But I think one of the things that we all agreed on is that the SDGs are badly tracked. I liked I have to agree with the points earlier that we said, we're going through some substantial change across the planet right now. And one of those changes is the fact that we recognize the difference between what it is we would love to see and where we come from and what we're not achieving. So I also wondered if, I wish that we could have more discussion, Professor, on your point that you spoke about earlier, the changes that we've seen in countries such as Niger and so on, that they are not necessarily for an African agency, but I think that that's a debate that really could stand on its own, because there's so much to discuss on that one. Like,
what is real African agency? But I think the first thing that we need to highlight, and I mean, I'm not going to go through everything, but one of the things that I think we need to highlight is, first of all, the African agenda. That was an agenda which is representing the kind of Africa we'd like to reach out to by 2063. Then we also have to talk about the reform of the United Nations Security Council. Yes, what President Kagame said, who speaks for Africa, is really, really relevant. And that's a question that Africa needs to discuss. You know, we talk about, I'm sorry, I'm going to be a bit controversial here, but the fact of the matter is that, you know, the South Africans went to the ICJ to talk about what's happening in Palestine. We seem to have forgotten about the Western Saharians. You know, they just want a referendum to determine who rules them. What's the point of that? We've got so many Security Council resolutions on that topic. Let's do some implementation. But when we talk about the UN Security Council resolution of reform, the fact of the matter is that we have an African position. Can we as Africa not just say, okay, we have a position, please don't try to get us. We have all kinds of people, all kinds of groups trying to say, well, you know, Africa, we think you should do it like this. We think, why is it that you actually, who's going to decide who's going to speak for Africa? But you know what? Let Africa decide. Let's not get caught up in this thing of, oh, somebody has to decide for us. I mean, this is just becoming ridiculous already. So ridiculous that this is my reading of the situation. We have a situation where in Brussels, the Belgians want to, most probably this is a simplification of the situation, but the Belgians are saying, we want to determine for the world which are Russian diamonds and which are the rest of the world's diamonds. In Africa, we have a situation where we are running our own diamonds. We are sorting, making sure that we have got some control of our resources, our diamonds. But guess what? That's not good enough. Because now we have to, there's an excuse to use a focus on Russian diamonds to undermine the African control of its own diamonds, its own resources. And I think that's the kind of thing that we as Africans need to put our foot down on and say, sorry, but we want to make decisions about our own resources. And that's what Namibia has done, and I know we're not the only country, but in November last year, we announced that we will no longer allow resources to be exported from our soil without having value addition. So those are just some of the topics that I think areas where Africa is taking agency and must take agency. I could go on a lot, but one of the things that I think we have forgotten about, and I think we've talked about, we've heard about this, is the whole education aspect. You know, we've got a dealing between industry and education. In Namibia, we have 50,000 unemployed graduates. It means that there were parents who supported their kids through school. Those parents paid for their kids. The system supported them. Nobody failed in their job. Everybody did their job perfectly well, so that these young people came and they stood on stage and they got clapped, or they got their degrees, etc. But the industry, the economy, there was something missing. So what has happened in places like Wales and other places in the world where you've had whole societies which have had to reskill needs to happen in our own societies, and that should be decided by us. We need to decide, you know, what are the skills that we need? Let's go and look for them and let's bring them home. Just the way I think that the Koreans did many years ago when they said, okay, we're going to focus on this, and now we're going to, and they managed to set their economy. So, and the last thing I want to focus on is the importance of including young people in our systems. You know, I started out in 1990, at the age of 25, I came to London to set up the High Commission here. And I feel, I mention this a lot, but I think that it's important for us to know that young people have got capacity. Let's not think that it's only us old folks who've got capacity. You know, it's time for us to say, right, young people, come and take up these positions and let's see what you can do. And let's hope that young people are like the young people in 1990 that did consider people like Funmi and Nkrumah as their heroes and as their leaders. I think.
Thank you very much. Last but certainly not the least, please get ready because the beginning of this round, led by the ambassador, who after the program is taking the short list. If you want to intervene. Thank you so much, and good evening to you. It's a pleasure to be here today. I start with a disclaimer. I am not an excellency. I am never served in any government. I have not been an ambassador. I have, worked in other spaces, and I hope my own contribution to the discussion will be from those experiences. In fact, so I want to add to the conversation or to the debate from 3 chapters of my own life experience, and 3 chapters where I would say I encountered African agency, and saw African agency at work and also its potential. The one chapter would be when I was a grade 4 or 4th grade student or learner in primary school, learning social studies. And our social studies textbook, I remember it was by, the publisher was Longman. Our social studies textbook was very elaborate about the Organization of African Unity at the time, the OAU, and also SADC with Tutsi from the region where I come from. I'm what would be considered a born free in my country. I was born at independence. I remember very vividly in social studies, which I really loved, hearing about the Organization of African Unity and what our forefathers and foremothers had contributed to by way of liberating the continent, but also in bringing together member states into what was at that time the Organization of African Unity. A second time is working in civil society in an organization where we work with survivors of torture by the state, and also survivors of sexual violence, and working also at a continental level with regional organizations towards policies that could be developed to support some of these individuals, some of these survivors. And then a third chapter is working as a secondary to the African Union that had put together a commission of inquiry in 2013 on South Sudan as a general advisor and interfacing with many women and girls who were survivors and victims of the conflict that had started in 2013. And so I think, as my own contribution, I believe that for self-renewal, we need a combination of new approaches, but that also reach back into the past, into what has worked, in order to realize the self-renewal of African agency. We've heard a lot about education, about civil society, about young people, but I think three specific areas. One is to recall where we are coming from. This very long journey of emancipation, of freedom, of self-determination for ourselves as a continent, but to connect it, to have a thread to where we are today. So Her Excellency Ambassador Scott talked about, she brought into the room, as have other people, those who led liberation for the continent. But I think what we miss, especially when we think about our regional organization, is documenting chronologically what this history has been, right up until some of the struggles that we encounter today. But also then making it available for learners all the way from primary school to higher education. The second thing I think is redirecting where and how we gather knowledge and evidence and data about Africa's agency. So as I said, working with regional institutions where, and I think this was already mentioned in terms of the hire of African agency or African expertise, but where constantly the examples, the data are not coming from Africans, but simultaneously Africans, whether they are in social movements and civil society, are repeatedly told by regional organizations, by African institutions themselves, that their experiences and the knowledge they have don't contribute. So, they kind of contribute, but not so much to decision-making, to making policy. So I think that is a real area for African self-renewal of agency, and making that data, that evidence of use to African researchers themselves, and surfacing the knowledge value of what our knowledge producers are actually doing. The last is deliberate. So we've heard about expertise and how this expertise is involved in different processes and different initiatives at various levels. And this is the conversation we've been having within the African Leadership Center. This is a conversation we are constantly having. And I liked that Ambassador Scott ended off on young people, but not only focusing on young people, but deliberately inserting intergenerational contributions into processes that concern the continent. So how we have mixed sets of teams or expert groups that are deliberately infused and inserted, whether it's a mediation process, a peace process, electoral process, but drawing also from previous experience, which we, again, are not doing so well. We tend to reinvent the wheel, but yet we have a lot of institutional memory, especially our regional institutions and organizations, but not making use of what has worked in the past. So I'll leave it there. Thank you very much for that. Are we still thinking on the program? Are we living there? You will see my colleagues there. Dr. Peter will be there, and will be there, and go around the room and say, please. Please, we'll call only the people that we can call. We don't have to. Over to you. Please wait your hands to the work to the floor.
Thank you very much. I'm Mike, but I'm not sure if it's here. Thank you very much. May I recognize a number of my colleagues that are here. Of course, the Excellency Johnson Macenje, Rwanda, colleagues of Cote d'Ivoire, the Deputy High Commissioner for South Africa, the I saw Papa also the High Commissioner for Ground sector. Maybe we could start by allowing a few minutes to comment on secondly, Johnson. Okay. Yeah, I think from here it's fine.
Thank you very much. I want to thank you so much for very thought-provoking ideas in just simple. I will make about 2 comments before I have those 2 minutes. But before I speak about agency, I just want to throw some point out here, and which of you would want to discuss it later, we should do it. Africa is 55 countries now. It used to be 54 for a long time, then South Sudan, now 55. China is one country. The United States is one. Russia is one. Canada is one. Australia is one. I'm not a professor, they are professor here, so please find something to do with that statement.
Africa is not one country.
Africa is 54. I want to talk about, I think Professor spoke about mass migration. And I want to find out, how did we get here? How did we get to a point where African young people, largely African, there are other nationalities, but when we focus on Africa, we are talking about Africa tonight, cross the Sahara, cross the Mediterranean Sea, look at the size of those monsters. And then, if they survive, because there is a very big percentage, very big possibility that they won't survive, they end up here, across Europe. Look at the catastrophe that represents. Look at the Africa-wide nature that is, and look at how it is infectious and how it grows. It probably started small, but now it has, taken all of us, the whole continent. And look at the pushback by Europe. Was it expected? Was it unexpected? How did we think this would end up? Is this going to be this kind of situation? So the issue to me is not that Europe is pushing back, or that there is a history of colonization. Sometimes we read arguments like, there was this colonization, so let's go and get our things from out there. Let's go to Europe and bring back our things. But I don't think you need the Mediterranean and Sahara in order to get back these things. So the issue is that 50 to 60 years after much of Africa got independence, Africa is the custodian of natural resources of arable land. The issue is that we still have masses, most of the sport mentioned 50% of the young people in the country. It could be the same across. We still have masses of our young people literally willing to commit suicide in order to cross the Sahara and the Mediterranean. Almost 60 years after, probably right after 60, after our countries got independence. So that is, in my view, failure of agency. And that is, I think what she said, what requires new thinking, new ideas. We can't remain the way we are. We need to look at the possibilities, look at the demographics, we mentioned them, we need to look at the youth, look at how to educate them, look at technology, what is it offering us now, look at infrastructure, look at women, include them in whatever we are doing across the globe, across our continent. And I think that will give us the agency that we need. Then look at our health. Look at our maternal mortality, look at our infant mortality, look at our vaccines, look at our life expectancy. Fix those. They are within our power. Collectively, we can do it. And I think we are right on the track doing it under various forms. But it is an opportunity we cannot afford to lose. Look at terror. Terror, which used to be something foreign to the African continent, but now, becomes terror, and the professors give it names, local terror, domestic terror. They will have to help me about this. I don't understand what domestic terror means, but there it is. But by a collective, small collective effort, Mozambique, the whole of the north part of Mozambique called Cabo Delgado is on the way to getting liberated by a collective of African countries. Africa is trying to do something for itself, including in the Central African Republic. And I'm told Mali and Burkina Faso are also doing some good work pushing back on Boko Haram. So those are the comments I wanted to make. And I think I'm within my time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Benson. May I invite Ambassador Keller?
I will start by thanking the organizer of this meeting. If we are here, it's because we think that our continent is a very important one for us. And we are discussing when family people we gather to discuss that. It's because we think that the question for what we are discussing is very important. It's one of our traditions in Africa. And speaking of Africa, even also of the different agencies, we are now speaking about what are the utility of those agencies, how should we work so that we can make them be more fruitful for our continents and our nation. I can just say, when we take our tradition and we say, when someone wants to go very far, he has to look back in history. And the history of our continent, it's what our father, which created the African Union, tried to put together. It's to think to unite a continent which we are saying that we are thinking that the different other family pillars. It's a continent which was united, but the different borders are divided us. And so we have this common history. We cannot deal with that, we cannot also remove that. What we have to do is to try to take as we have, to try to work together on our differences. And you can say that if we are discussing of those agencies and the way to make them be more fruitful, it's because it's useful for us. It's because they are existing. We cannot speak of something which is died. And so it's very important for us to keep that in mind. In all the words, the international relation, the discussion, the negotiation, it's a route to deal with common interests. And for us in Africa, we have to still keep on that. Even our different agencies have weaknesses, we have to look at the opportunity. The opportunity we have is to work together to try to strengthen our organization. There's lack of money, there's the lack of money, but there's not a lack of ideas, of opportunities. We speak of so many opportunities. Our richness we have the youth of our population. We have also the richness of our different soil and economy. We have the country which is like a fiancé, all the different countries want to marry with that. We know that. We speak of all the different summits. One of the panelists speak of that. All the different countries, all the former colonization want now to have specific relation with our countries. It's because it's a place to be. It's because we have a richness, and we must just try to focus on that and continue our work together like we do in our country. We sit down, we discuss, we continue to discuss, we continue to work on what we think is more important for us. What is more important for us, what we think, it's education, it's empowerment of women. It's working on the reduction of the lack of technology in our country. But the technology can be a that's for our different economy. The economy in Cote d'Ivoire is different of the economy of Mali because we don't have the same richness, we don't have the same economy, we don't have the same geographical richness. So for me, I think it's a very important thing to have put this question into the agenda to discuss and to try to find new ideas. As the professor said, we have to keep forward and to go forward. There's a lot of opportunity, there's a lot of ideas we can put together that we try to strengthen our organization so that we can give also ideas to our different governments to try to work with
Thank you very much, Andrea. And now by Deputy High Commissioner.
Good evening, Excellencies, and good evening, professors and students from King's College. I feel very honored to be here amongst Africans in London discussing African agency. As a young African agency is really critical at a time where Africa has the youngest population, where African youth are looking for opportunities out there, where African leaders must ensure that the decisions that they make will ensure that African youth are able to prosper. And for me, the biggest example of demonstration of African agency has been the African Free Trade Agreement. At a time where the world was disintegrating, Africa showed the strength of its agents. And I am a very proud African today, where Africa has united, Africa has decided it will trade with Africa, and Africa will industrialize. Because the FCTA forces the continent to industrialize, because that's the only way the youth of Africa will prosper from now going forward. And I think the second point I want to touch on is what High Commissioner Scott said, that the young people of 2024, do we carry the same agency that her youth of 1990 carried? And High Commissioner Scott, I will guarantee you that we do. That we carry the same urgency for the continent, for young people, for ensuring that Africa prospers, that we still look up to the leaders of pre-1990, and we look up to you, the leaders that came after them, who are handing the baton over to us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Morocco, I don't know if it's Admiral Manoa or I don't know. Yeah, it's Admiral.
You really, I just want to thank King's College as well again for organising this amazing event. I'm actually an alumnus of King's College, it's great to be back and see what it is. Yeah, I mean, very, very thankful for the discussion and for all the presentations and the points made. I just had a quick question about how we can, as a continent, speak of common agency when the general discourse is unfortunately sometimes still a bit of national agency. We heard Ambassador Scott talk about this in Sahara being mentioned. I mean, we could also mention the Capri liberation movement in Namibia itself and many other separatist movements in Africa. If we're talking about Morocco as well, where the idea is to build capacity in Africa and to help our youth and our economic tissues to develop by themselves as well. how can we go beyond artificial divisions? Because we still do talk about them a lot. How can we go beyond artificial divisions and speak in unison on issues that matter for the country's future? So, namely, of course, developing infrastructure for the new economic development opportunities. Our esteemed colleague from South Africa said about the African Future Review coming into power. So that's obviously another issue that we could, I think, focus a bit more on, rather than division. Of course, I mean, wouldn't want to come back to what we would call Western Sahara, but obviously the African continent is itself divided on that. We've got more than 30 African countries and more than 100 countries in the world that support work on this issue. So, of course, how can we just get up to that question? How can we talk in unison about some issues that are obviously for the African continent, while we still talk about divisions and close to those divisions as well? So that's my question. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. We have the last set of interventions from the floor, and I thought we'll just take those interventions quickly. We'll finish at 5 minutes past 8. You can't hear me, I don't think so. Can you hear me now? No. I think the matter is, we'll finish at 5 minutes past 8, and Ford is waiting on the other side. My colleagues are waiting to serve drinks and food. From the floor, 4 short interventions. Then we go back to the panel, give us your last 1 minute statements about what you have heard tonight, and some very important questions. And I want to really thank the ambassadors that have intervened, because I think we've shed some light on the mobile areas and enforcing sometimes the points they made. I want to first and foremost, so I found on this list a journalist and a member of the African Leadership Center. But first on the list that have been invited to intervene, Professor Ikpe, who herself now professors at the School of Oriental and African Studies, called SWAS for short, it's not SWAS. But she was first and foremost really the senior colleague at the African Leadership Center before she absconded to SWAS. But Professor Ikpe, I'd like you to take the stand. Please compare Professor Olonisakin. After that, if you can just sit to the front and come up after that, that would be great. And I would say Julius, I don't know Julius's last name. Oh, thank you. I don't want to. So if you just stay there, I'll call you back that after. Only it's not from here. So 2 minutes for each intervention. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. And I will stand on the protocol that was already established and also say that the beauty about speaking is I work for no government, so that means I can be a little bit provocative. I will try and be sharp, precise, but also I want to emphasize provocative. And I'll tell a few stories, but ensure that they're short and sharp. Now, when I was doing my PhD in what seemed like many years ago, my supervisor reminded me that there are no new answers or no new questions under the sun. Right? There's no big research question that you're going to come with that no one has ever looked at. And that the task of a PhD is for you to explore all the issues with new lenses or all the issues by raising new questions. I say this to make the point that all of the questions that we're talking about here, we know the answers to, right? We have debated these issues ad nauseum in various contexts. We know the answers to this issue. And the question at hand, perhaps, is why is it so difficult for us to implement those questions? And I think that is what brings us to the issues around power, for instance, as an important way to begin to unpack what the challenges are. The heart of the matter here, as far as I'm concerned, is the global political moment we find ourselves in. That's the moment of opportunity that we reflect on. I think many of us believe that when the Trump era began, that was a powerful moment of opportunity. I'm not sure how well the African continent sees it. But we find ourselves in another global political moment. And so for me, the question about agency and renewal is not about these case studies of what we have done well at the African Union. I think we can even cite the one big example of our quote-unquote failure, or for instance, Libya, as one of those examples where we see that we had a particularly important moment
to intervene collectively, and now we see the end results of the failure to do that. And we know that that goes back to the point Dr. Funmi mentioned, which is around the fact that very quickly we're easily separated into nation-state interests rather than the collective position we arrived at in Addis Ababa, right? Because now you're separated on the very points Ambassador from Cote d'Ivoire was making, which is a well, Kenya and Cote d'Ivoire position differently. The things that Kenya can argue against, Cote d'Ivoire might say, my friend, not today. I need to think about the survival of our people. So 3 points in relation to this, which is linked to passively. And I think the Libya example gives us an opportunity to think about this question of passively. But I want to return to the citation that Ambassador Esipisu offered us of Balozi Kimani. Now, one of the things about Ambassador Kimani's comments, which is around speaking ethically to the question around Russia's intervention to Ukraine, was also for me the sort of difficulty that in making that principled position that Kenya had alongside other countries in relation to Russia's intervention, we still had to contend with the fact that we were defending a country who did not think of us as humans, right? Who treated Africans in the most terrible way at the height of the crisis. So even when there was a crisis, they still had an opportunity to raise, right? And beyond that particular moment of the responses to Africans, we saw their own reviews of the Ramaphosa-led intervention around trying to position an African position. So when our person is still under contestation, even in the very places where we are trying to make political positions, what does that tell us about how we need to engage? Because those people at the end of the day are always going to see us subhuman. So why is it that we cannot collectively cohere around a political agenda when it is so easy for them to say those are people who know nothing about international affairs? What can they come and tell us about this particular issue? They only know things that are pertinent to Africa. They don't understand European politics. Because after all, we can only understand local issues. Our local issues do not have the capacity to give us the tools to extrapolate to the global level, yet they have the capacity to take the global and argue that we can influence these things across the African continent. So personhood is something that we really must think about, and the fact that African personhood is consistently outplayed. The second point is around political ideology. Our sister from Barbados has led a wonderful charge. Prime Minister Mia Mottley has led a wonderful charge that has reignited not just the Pan-African logics, but also a Black internationalist agenda. And I think for us, the question at hand is that as we talk about African agency, we must remember that the Nkrumahs and co that you were citing were part of a generation that were very clear that the African agenda, the Pan-African agenda, as it was rooted in the African continent, was intimately connected to the fates of those in the Black diaspora and its external borders. So that connection that Mia and others are inviting us to make, for me, lies at the center of the questions of African agency. This therefore means that we must move away from pronouncements that we don't act on. Ambassador from Rwanda, I believe, you said we can do what we will with that statement around Africa is 55 countries and Europe, Australia, China, one country. This is what I'm doing with it, Ambassador. That if we are saying that Africa will no longer be summoned as 55 countries to go and sit in Paris, or to go and sit somewhere and talk about the relations between X country vis-a-vis 55 countries, then why don't we follow up those pronouncements? Why is it that the next time we're giving an invitation and say, no, the AU will host you in Addis, or will host you in Kigali, or will host you in Nairobi, you come and talk to us, because we are presenting an African agenda. We must match our pronouncements with our actions. Because my final point is that this is where then the sub-generation after me is getting disappointed in us. It's getting disappointed in my generation, it's getting disappointed in your generation. And I want to make this point in the following ways. When President Mbeki was speaking after Mandela's death, a journalist asked him something about the loss of this huge generation, this perfect leader. You know, Mandela was always lifted up as the best thing that ever came out of Africa, and there's nothing else that comes after that. And Mbeki challenged the journalist and said, I want to resist the exceptionalization of Mandela, because I believe that Mandela belonged to a specific generation. And that generation had its own mandate. It had the mandate that it needed to fulfill. I think that our young people today are telling us something very powerful. And how is it that they're telling us that? When they're looking to the Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso axis, and they're saying those are people who are matching their words with actions. We can say all we want to say about military intervention, coups, and the problems. We have studied it, there's lots of scholarship. Dr. Funmi here, Olonisakin, and many others have written extensively about this, Ebo Hatchfield and others, military and militarism and others. We have the scholarship. But if our young people are telling us, those people are actually doing what we've been asking for, they're matching their words with action, the question I ask of you, those of you who are leading our institutions today, are we listening? And if we're listening, are we actually responding to what they're saying? Are we simply ring fencing the sort of systems and structures that we think are important for us to replace? I rest you.
Thank you, you're standing between us and dinner.
That was king, that was not so hard.
But that also makes the point that it's the product of this group that SOAS to need to impose that. Professor Rinson. 2 minutes, please, because that woman took more than 2 minutes.
I heard you, Prof, but let me begin by congratulating Kings and the Kenyan Embassy for really excellent evening of conversation and dialogue. And the format, I think, is exceptional as well, to be able to contribute to effectively a Pan-African roundtable on this very important topic, which we are exploring, a topic that sits at the very heart of catalyzing Africa's revitalization. And so as I was listening very carefully to the conversation, the question arose, so how do we pivot from symbolic to substantive agency? I heard that conversation this evening from yourselves as our keynote speakers, as well as from some of the panelists. What Prof. Mahmoud challenged us requires genuine introspection, proactivity, and smart agency. Really rang for me around this question: how do we pivot as Africans from symbolic to substantive? That is from agency as rhetoric, agency as a set of rules and procedures, to substantive agency. Indeed, as critical interlocutors at this conversation in our nation states, in intergovernmental and global relations, and in academia, I think it's fair to say that it also requires self-introspection. I think we introspect often from the inside out, or is it the outside in? And we spend little time introspecting from the personal inside out, reflecting on these generations of history and expectations that we carry. And I use that term mildly because we all carry baggage of our own education, of our own colonial and post-colonial settings. And so I challenge us as we undertake this introspection, as we undertake this self-examination, to do so at a personal level and ask fundamental questions about our own personal agency and its location. Prof. Olonisakin, your intervention had me thinking about indeed whether we are fellow travelers or whether we are interested, concerned, and transformative agents. And of the evolution, of course, of Africa, but also of the global order in Africa. And it seems as we think about the topics, the conversation of the rest of this week, there are 7 significant and interconnected fulcrums that we have to pivot on as well. The economy, the global financial system, peace and security, Science, technology, and innovation, hardly spoken about in our conversation, but sits at the heart of catalyzing Africa's self-renewal. Culture, spoke of migration. We spoke not so much about our humanity, except our last colleague who really spoke passionately about that. And so that's what I offer us in my contribution, that there are specific focal points or pivot points for smart agency. And I just pick on one or two as I stop. Economic development and trade integration. How is it possible that we continue to export minerals that are so vital to the green economy, and we export them unbeneficiated? I drive in South Africa from Johannesburg to Port Elizabeth for the annual trek back home as a migrant in Johannesburg, and I come across these hundreds of trucks carrying manganese ore, unbeneficiated, maybe washed only, but fundamentally unbeneficiated. How is it possible that these critical minerals in the global economy simply find themselves exported unbeneficiated? And so we can see the connections then to rapid and unplanned urbanization. Spoke about minerals and mining, just transition, and climate change. Can we see the connections? Higher education, science, innovation, and technology. Armed conflict. Where does armed conflict sit in this minerals and mining conversation? The African peer review mechanism, the African governance, and in particular the African Parliament. I think on these are specific spaces that requires consideration, specific action in their own right, but recognition of the connectedness. Because if you fix one and you don't address the other, you're not going to achieve the outcome that we're looking for. And finally, ditto for education. We spoke about how we educate. How we educate requires its own deep reflection. We are so focused on disciplinary studies, often, as Williams would call it, thin conversations in our disciplines. Not thick conversations in those disciplines, but more importantly, the interdisciplinary conversations are not there. And so we will teach peace and security at a huge cost on its own, as opposed to peace and security alongside leadership. Peace and security and leadership alongside the economy, alongside armed conflict, and so on and so forth. And I stop there. And I hope these are also helpful pointers on the way forward. Thank you very much.
Julius, how about you? How about you, Julius? Where's Dr. Wale Ismail? All right, okay. I was just going to ask whether you wanted to give up your spot for dinner, but if you're going to be literally 1 minute. How about you?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Esipisu. I'm a broadcaster. I host African focus on Kanko Radio, and I'm also the editor for Informants of the Minister Publisher here. This is kind of my home because I spent many years in this field working for BBC World Service. So thanks, Kings.
Not Kings World Service.
Yeah, so I just want to acknowledge and thank you all for the great contribution, great conversations, and that's what we're in agreement with most of the things. But the only thing that I didn't hear you express was to give a new face to the agency, the agency, in a way that you can understand what this is all about. And I just will do that. I want to see the African agency as a pass. And imagine this African agency is not very big, guys. It can look and see from, it's looking at the world. And what is seen, this is the world which is very divided. It is the world led by the United Nations, United Nations Security Council, with 5 members of that body with veto power. And one country can change the direction of where the world goes. It's extremely powerful. The agency will see the world divided in terms of Africa, where sometimes in other countries, we fight wars that are not power. The war there, before it was there, Kenya, Tanzania formed at the same time in 1988. Then you have all these Nepal or some Bin Laden, Afghanistan, everywhere. Agents will see the world divided. The agents will see Africa with produce. The agents will see Africa where there is a lot of domination, because slavery, colonization. And these agents will be very impressed. But to relieve agents, I just want to say, terms of attention. While most African countries are independent, we claim sovereignty, we're standing in our feet. So I want the agency to change direction and look at where we are in it. And the agency will see a different Africa. The agency will see Kenya leading the world with more oil money than this one. The agency will begin to see a lot of resources within our continent that are feeding the rest of the world. Coined the phrase of former Prime Minister of the UK, he once said about 3/4 of tea drunk in the UK comes from Kenya. There are many other countries producing so many things. Tanzania from Tanzania, scattered across London. All these things, the agency see that. So what are we saying? What are we going to tell the agency? I want to tell the agency in a very brief way. Africa is in a different position. We cannot lament, right? And although we have seen the problems in the world, we need to seek solutions. Let's seek solutions for that. Even if it looks challenging, challenges don't come to heal us, it can make us strong. Even if it looks impossible, there's nothing is possible where there is a will. So I want the agency to begin to change and see a different Africa. I want the agency to see that with the will we can get back. And in a very brief way, I just want the agency to see that we can do everything we want in Africa as Africa, looking for inward solutions to our own problems. We can do it. And instead just to stop, finish up saying, we can see problems, but we can get scared and close your eyes, not to see them. I just want to say a very powerful message today. Let us stop closing our eyes at the dark night to avoid darkness. Open your eyes.
All I would say is to ask the panel members as soon as Dr. Wani is smiling, I'm not going to mention this things. As long as the center of thank you. I will just ask the panelists to please give us one thing that you've got to do, one sentence, one point. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I kind of the same protocol, very quick one. Because of the last speaker. Yes, there was a question posed by from Kagame for Africa. I think the question is easy now to answer. And I challenge anyone to say my answer is wrong. The young people of Africa speak for African, not the agency. My main contribution to the conversation so far today is to point out, if we elevate the conversation to a more strategic level, that the absence of a continental agenda, a collective agenda that defines Africa, that defines Africa as a continent and a priority is the key challenge here. At every point in time, where and when Africa's agency has been quite manifest and having desired impact on the global scene, it has always been around the particular continental agenda. You look at it in the 50s and 60s, it was a demonstration. At the end of the century, it was about democratization and setting up a union. So the lack of coherence in coming up with a new agenda is a key challenge to manufacturing Africa agencies as we know it now. Currently, what do we have? We have disaggregated agenda agencies all over the place, multiple agencies all over the place. So the key challenge for Africa now is how to coalesce multiple agencies. What can coalesce these agencies together? Who can do the coalescing? And when the time to do the coalescing?
if we can organize around the key continental agenda, and where is this agenda going to come from? We have to look at what the young people continent are talking about, what are their key priorities. That is the agenda for Africa, and that is what we are going to Africa to do.
Thank you, Wally. You did so well, thank you. Why don't I start with the women in the panel agendas? With the men. Sure. One thing. Do you want to use the? One thing, I think the self-introspection and our own personal agency and its location and the recognition. Wow. What's the result?
Wow, this is a cool movement. We're in the So I took my notes and I thought, what should I speak about? And I would like to say that we Africans have got what it takes. Let's just take one example, ESG compliance. You know, everybody tells us we've got to be ESG compliant. Guess what? We've got all the regulations. We are ESG compliant. It's the companies that are outside that are trying to work in our countries, which need to prove that they're ESG compliant. And guess what? Once they say we're working in a place which is ESG compliant, you know, then we have access to $3 trillion. Nobody's talking about those things because it doesn't serve anyone. So let's look for those things which are a little bit outside what we normally think about, and let's find them and make them clear. Thank you so much. Thank you. Yes, thank you.
I would say, and I'll go back to my last purchase. And the content we really need to redefine for ourselves, the new strength. It is coming, it is imminent, it has to do with new technologies, with critical minerals, with the future of where the world is going, and all the resources are back. So it is an opportunity to collectively come together and redefine how we move forward. Because we don't want to say next time.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. I want to emphasize the importance of self-introspection. I facilitate a class called Early Workshop, and I ask two questions. And I ask the first question, who wants change? Everyone raises up. And I ask the next question, who wants to change? And second point quickly, we in Africa needs to learn how to fly with two wings, not only the massive wing, but also determine without this, there's not going to be sustainable agency.
That's great. That's amazing.
Thank you. Well, I agree with you that the young people of Africa speak about that. So let me be a politician fact, not an academic. In order for that to really come to the fore, we need to get our politics right. Because this is about power relations. If we get our politics right on the continent, that scramble that is already there, it's not coming. The scramble is right here with us. We won't be able to respond to it. And the only way to respond is to have that people-centered agenda at the front of everything we're talking about. If we leave it to, and if you go back to those moments you referred to, and which we've all referred to tonight, the struggle led by leaders for decolonization, the anti-apartheid liberation struggle, the democratization struggle. Not all African leaders were on board. There were dissenters. We had dissenters in all those struggles, but we had visionary leadership, the unique movement, the Nyerere in that first generation of leaders. And even in the second generation too, we had those who were the drivers of change. And there's no reason why we cannot hold the feet of our leaders, our political leaders, to fire, to recognize what the young people are saying to us. Because it's loud and clear, whether it's in the music, and you hear it, you go around London today, the music you hear in the black cab and in the restaurant, it's that Pan-African music. And they're saying something about it. Even if you talk about the migrants, I mean, mass migration that His Excellency rightly pointed out, we could have a strategic approach to it, not one defined in Italy, but one defined in Addis Ababa by ourselves. But we cannot define it if we are recipients of the funds of Brussels in order to address migration issues on the continent of Africa. Even the 0.2% import levy that African Union put in place, that we all signed up to as countries, only 17 out of the 55 African countries have incorporated this into their domestic law. Even those who have done so are not paying that 0.2 import levy. So what are we talking about? I don't think we're ready. Thank you.
To conclude, I will not conclude because I think we have turned some straightforward responses in this debate today. We filed this. We wanted to see what a dialogue, we all in the UK, we're not talking to each other, we're not talking amongst each other. We will document this in the most succinct way possible and use that to speak back in our classes and hope we can send it back to you for your own session as well. We've only just started. I think the debate will continue and people can begin to gear up for something in this year that we're calling the African Public Song. It will come and we will announce it in due time. But I just want to call on my co-conspirator, Ambassador Esipisu, to please give us vote of thanks. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. It now just leaves me with a simple task to thank all of you for making the time to be here, for contributing to a very vibrant debate, and for taking on board the fact that smart agency is what will take Africa forward. Smart agency that recognizes Africa's challenges, but also recognizes the progress Africa has made along the way. So from Bush House, good night.
The journey to dinner is literally across the room on the citizen side on the south side. I want to use this opportunity to thank my colleagues. I can't begin to mention them by name, but coordinated by Dr. and to thank my research assistants. Michael Mosa, I don't know where he is. He did some excellent literature debate from here. I want to say personal thanks. And Adam Lewis for doing some background work for me. Thank you. Good evening. Good afternoon.
Well done, well done.